Welcome to Neurovale. The greatest stupidity is thinking you are never stupid. Machiavelli. Have you ever listened to someone talk and realized every word they say quietly exposes how shallow they think? A stupid man does not always look foolish at first glance. He might dress well, speak loudly, or even sound confident, but his stupidity hides in the words he repeats every day, in the excuses he builds to protect his fragile ego. Machiavelli understood that ignorance is not simply lack of knowledge, it is the refusal to think deeper. A stupid man clings to shallow phrases because they help him avoid responsibility. He repeats what feels comfortable instead of what is true. His speech reveals his fear of change, his insecurity, and his desperate need to sound wise without being wise. You can learn more about a man from what he says casually than from his greatest speeches. A fool exposes his mind sentence by sentence, never realizing his words betray him. In this breakdown, we will uncover 7 phrases that instantly reveal the thinking of a foolish man, phrases Machiavelli himself would have recognized as signs of weakness, vanity, and self-deception. These are not just words. They are warning signs. Now, let's begin. Number 1. I already know that. It sounds harmless, but that one sentence quietly destroys growth. You hear it from people who believe awareness is the same as understanding. They have heard the words before, so they assume they have learned the lesson. But hearing something and living it are two very different things. A stupid man treats knowledge like a trophy. He collects ideas but never applies them. When someone tries to teach him something, he cuts them off with, "I already know that," as if the conversation is beneath him. What he does not see is that wisdom grows only when ego steps aside. The moment he says those words, his mind shuts. He stops listening, he stops learning, and he begins to decay intellectually. Think about it. How many people claim to know about discipline, patience, or success, yet live the complete opposite? They know, but they do not understand. They know, but they do not practice. That is the difference between intelligence and arrogance. A wise man can hear the same truth 1,000 times and still learn something new because he listens without pride. A fool cannot even learn once because his ego convinces him he has arrived. The tragedy is that he mistakes repetition for boredom instead of mastery. The truth is simple. The people who say, "I already know that," usually don't. The ones who truly know never need to say it. They just live it. Number 2, that's just how I am. It sounds like honesty, but it is usually a confession of weakness dressed as pride. You often hear it from people who have stopped trying to grow. They say it to escape responsibility, to avoid change, to make their flaws sound noble. But the truth is, that phrase is the wall that keeps them trapped in the same life year after year. When a man says, "That's just how I am," what he really means is, "I refuse to change even when I know I should." It is easier to protect your habits than to challenge them. It is easier to call stubbornness authenticity than to face your own immaturity. For example, a man who loses his temper easily might say, "That's just how I am," instead of admitting that he lacks self-control. A lazy man might use the same line to justify his comfort zone. Machiavelli would have seen this as a silent act of surrender. The fool convinces himself that his flaws are part of his personality, not his prison. He would rather protect his identity than improve it. The wise man, however, sees identity as something flexible, something to be sharpened. He knows growth is not betrayal. It is evolution. The danger of this phrase is that it sounds strong but comes from fear. It is a shield the weak use to defend their limitations. A man who truly knows himself never says, "That's just how I am." He says, "This is who I am becoming." The difference is courage. One clings to comfort, the other embraces transformation. Number 3. Everyone is the same. It sounds simple, even fair, but it is one of the laziest lies the human mind tells itself. You hear it from people who have stopped paying attention, from those who find comfort in generalizing what they do not understand. When a man says everyone is the same, what he really means is, I no longer want to think deeply about people. It is an excuse to stop observing, to stop learning, and to stop taking responsibility for how he treats others. Machiavelli would have seen this phrase as the language of mental laziness. It allows the fool to move through life without effort. If everyone is the same, he never has to study character, never has to question motives, and never has to adjust his own behavior. He treats everyone with the same careless assumptions and then blames the world when things fall apart. Think about relationships. Someone gets hurt once and suddenly they say, all women are the same, or all men are the same. What they are really doing is using pain as an excuse to stop thinking. It is easier to build walls than to build wisdom. The wise person studies patterns, but never erases individuality. Every human is a mixture of motives, fears, and contradictions. To say everyone is the same is to admit that you cannot see beyond the surface. The fool says it to sound experienced, but it only reveals that he has not learned how to discern. The wise understand that people are not copies. They are puzzles. And the moment you stop trying to solve them, you stop growing. Intelligence begins where assumptions end. Number 4. If I were him, I'd do it better. You hear this line often from people who have never been tested. It usually comes from the safety of distance, from those who watch others take risks while they sit comfortably in judgment. A man who has never carried the weight of responsibility always believes he would have done it better. The moment he faces the same pressure, his confidence crumbles. It is easy to sound wise when your only job is to comment. The fool criticizes the man in the arena while ignoring the courage it takes to even step inside it. He points out the flaws of leaders, creators, and dreamers, but never creates anything himself. His words are his only accomplishment. He does not realize that failure teaches more than observation ever will. Imagine a man watching a football game shouting what he would have done differently, yet he has never trained, never sweated, never faced the crowd. His mind feeds on illusion. He believes his opinions carry weight, but they are made of air. Machiavelli would say he mistakes hindsight for wisdom. Anyone can predict the right move after the battle has ended. The wise man, however, speaks carefully because he understands how hard action truly is. He knows that leadership, art, or ambition always look easier from the outside. He respects those who try, even when they fail, because trying itself demands courage. The fool will always say, I would have done it better. The wise man says, now that I have tried, I understand why it was difficult. One talks to look clever, the other acts to become wise. Number 5, I don't care what people think. It sounds bold, even powerful, but most times it is a lie people tell themselves to hide their disappointment. You hear it from those who once tried to impress others and failed. Instead of accepting that truth, they build a wall of indifference and call it confidence, but beneath that wall lives insecurity. When a man truly has self-respect, he does not need to announce that he does not care. His focus and results speak for him. The fool says it loudly because he is trying to convince himself. It is not strength, it is self-defense. He pretends not to care because caring has become too painful. He turns rejection into rebellion and calls it freedom. Think about it. The man who truly does not care is calm. He listens, he observes, and then he decides what matters. The one who keeps saying, I don't care what people think, usually cares the most. He is haunted by the opinions he claims to ignore. Every insult echoes in his mind, and every comparison burns quietly in his chest. Machiavelli would have called this false pride. The wise man studies what others think, not to be ruled by it, but to understand how people move and what they value. He knows perception is power. The fool rejects feedback and calls it peace, but he stays blind to how the world sees him. True confidence is not about ignoring opinions. It is about mastering them. You do not grow by pretending not to care. You grow when you care selectively, when you listen without losing yourself. Number 6. Money isn't important. It sounds noble, almost spiritual, but more often than not it comes from people who have never tasted real freedom. You hear it from those who secretly feel powerless, but cover that feeling with moral talk. They pretend to be above money because they have never had enough of it to understand what it truly represents. Money itself is not evil or pure. It is a mirror that reflects your discipline, your intelligence, and your ability to create value. When someone says money does not matter, they usually mean they have lost control over it. They use that phrase to turn weakness into virtue. It is easier to say money is meaningless than to admit you never learned how to manage it. Machiavelli would have seen this as a convenient illusion. A man who dismisses money often ends up being controlled by those who understand it. The landlord, the employer, the politician. Someone always holds power over those who think money is unimportant. Freedom is not built on ignorance, it is built on control. Think about it. A father who cannot pay his bills cannot choose peace. A dreamer who ignores money soon loses his dream. The wise man respects money because he knows it protects his time and decisions. He does not worship it, but he understands it is the language of survival and influence. The fool pretends not to care about it, but spends his life obeying those who do. True wisdom is not in rejecting money, but in mastering it so it serves you, not the other way around. Number 6. It's not my fault. This sentence sounds like innocence, but it is really surrender. You hear it every time someone fails and cannot face their reflection. It is the anthem of the powerless, the quiet confession of a person who has chosen excuses over control. A fool says it to escape guilt, but what he does not see is that every time he says those words, he gives a piece of his strength away. When a man believes nothing is his fault, nothing becomes his responsibility. He lives as if life is something that happens to him, not something he shapes. He blames the economy, his parents, his luck, his friends, or even fate, anyone but himself. But the truth is, blaming others feels comforting only because it protects the ego from shame. It does not protect the life you are wasting. Machiavelli would have called this mental weakness. Power begins with ownership. Even when life deals you a bad hand, the strong mind asks, "What can I still control?" The fool never asks that. He finds comfort in being the victim because victims do not have to try again. Think about it. The man who says, "It's not my fault," after losing his job, never learns why he was easy to replace. The one who blames everyone for his broken relationships never sees his own patterns. The wise man, however, takes ownership of everything within his reach. He does not take blame to suffer, but to learn. He understands that responsibility is not punishment, it is power. The moment you stop saying, "It's not my fault," life quietly starts to obey you. Number 7. I can't change now. It sounds reasonable, even mature, but it is one of the most dangerous lies a person can tell themselves. You hear it from people who have quietly given up. They wear exhaustion like wisdom and call surrender acceptance. But what they are really saying is, "I am too afraid to start again." Age, habits, and fear become their excuses. They treat personal growth as betrayal of their past choices, their comfort, and the identity they have built around their limitations. A man who says, "I can't change now," is not being honest, he is being afraid. He has confused stability with stagnation. Think about the people who claim they are just not good with money, too old to learn, or too broken to love. They say it with a tired smile, as if it makes them wise, but it is really a quiet surrender. They have convinced themselves that evolution is for the young and naive, yet every wise person knows the truth. Change is not about age, it is about courage. Machiavelli would have seen this as a failure of will. The mind that refuses to adapt becomes its own prison. The wise man knows change is uncomfortable because it threatens pride. It forces you to admit that your old ways were not enough. But comfort is never the reward of the strong. Growth demands humility. A man who truly understands life does not say, "I can't change now." He says, "I may not like it, but I will adapt." That simple shift separates those who evolve from those who quietly fade. Change is not betrayal, it is survival. And the moment you stop changing, life starts changing without you. In final words, a man who cannot hear truth will live forever in his own illusion. Machiavelli. Have you ever noticed how a person's words quietly reveal their entire mindset? You do not need to see a man's past or know his plans. Just listen to how he speaks. A fool exposes himself not through ignorance, but through the language he uses to protect it. Every careless phrase, every defensive statement, every lazy excuse tells a story about how deeply he fears responsibility. Machiavelli understood that stupidity is not about lack of intelligence, it is about resistance to awareness. The stupid man hides behind phrases that make him feel safe. He blames others to protect his pride, calls weakness honesty, and disguises fear as wisdom. His problem is not that he cannot think, it is that he refuses to. His comfort means more to him than his clarity. The wise man, however, treats his words like mirrors. He listens to what comes out of his mouth and asks, "What does this reveal about me?" That question alone separates evolution from stagnation. So ask yourself, which voice do you feed every day? The voice that excuses or the one that examines? Because in the end, stupidity is not born, it is repeated. And wisdom begins the very moment you stop saying what keeps you small. Thank you for watching.